Good afternoon, everybody. In this video, I'm going to cover Paradise Lost, books 1 and 2. My goal for this video is to give you some context for Paradise Lost to help you better understand it. Let's get going with it then. As far as Paradise Lost goes, we have been talking about epic poems throughout the whole course so far. So we talked about the Iliad, we had a bit on the Aeneid, you guys read some Dante's Inferno. All those poems are in the epic tradition, but John Milton's Paradise Lost is the only poem that we're reading that's written in the English language. So it might not seem that way. It's Milton is a challenging read, but it is the only one written in English. So this poem was written in the 1660s. John Milton was part of this. There was a lot of political turmoil happening in England. This book takes place was written just after the English Civil War. So the English Civil War, there's a long, complicated history about that, but for the most part, it was a war divided along the lines of religion. You had radical Calvinists, who took over the Parliament, and you had the king, and they kind of clashed and battled with each other. I'm very much simplifying the English Civil War. But so eventually there came a time where the king was overthrown and the Parliament took over control of the government, and they instilled a temporary dictator named Oliver Cromwell. Well, Oliver Cromwell was pretty much a tyrant, and John Milton was actually sort of his propaganda minister, during all of this. So by the time Paradise Lost was written, the English Civil War was over. Cromwell was hung, and it's been said from a political context that Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost echoes a lot of the same dialogue about liberty, about injustice against a king, and all those types of things that Milton's Satan echoes here. So if you're interested in reading more about the English Civil War, do so. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's a little bit of the backdrop. Milton was very much sympathetic to the radical Calvinist movement. So, as far as Calvinism goes, this is something that you need to be able to understand to get this poem. So, up until when we read Dante's Inferno, there still wasn't a Protestant Reformation. Right? Most Christians today are Protestants, not Catholics. Everybody that's not a Catholic is a Protestant, for the most part, except Eastern Orthodox over in East Europe. Well, over a century or so after the Reformation, the Protestants took a bunch of different turns. And one turn was this idea of Calvinism, this idea that God has predestined our fates. So are we going to hell? Are we going to heaven? Well, God knows where we're going to go before our souls are even born into the world. So He's an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful God. He knows what we're going to do. So in Paradise Lost, though, the angels who rebel against God don't know that He has that type of omnipotent power. So this raises some questions in the poem, right? Is Satan perhaps a hero? Right? It seems like a difficult question, But is he really a hero, right? He is wanting to showcase how he is his own person, right? He has his own free will to make choices. God, if he's predetermined to be a villain, then is that fair to him? So this is kind of where we pick up with Paradise Lost in Book 1. Book 1 and 2 are the books where Satan is perhaps portrayed in this sympathetic, romantic way. I say perhaps here because this is up for interpretation and opinion. It depends how sympathetic you are to Satan's rhetoric in Paradise Lost. There's some great passages in Book 1 that especially go into this. So one such passage is around line 100 in Book 1. Satan says, "Yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change, though changed in outward luster, that fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit that with the mightiest raised me to contend, to the fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits armed that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. And what is else not to be overcome? That glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me, to bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee, and deify his power, who from the terror of this arm so late doubted his empire. That were low indeed. That were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall, since by fate the strength of gods in this imperial substance cannot fail, since through experience of this great event in arms not worse, and foresight much advanced, we weigh with more successful hope resolved to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs, and in the excess of joy sole reigning holds the tyranny of heaven." So you can kind of hear just from the way that I read that passage, Satan is saying, okay, listen, I'm a proud person. Pride for Satan is his downfall, sort of like how pride was for Achilles in the Iliad. Right? Pride is his downfall. He will never bend, he will never yield to an unjust tyrant. Right? He can be tortured for eternity. Nothing is ever going to stop his hate forever. The next passage is around line 250 or so. You guys can find it in your edition. I'm using a different edition today from you guys. But the passage reads, "Farewell, happy fields where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors! Hail, infernal world! And thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own self, and itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I still be the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater? Here at last we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." So that line, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, right? He is so proud, that he would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. The interesting part of this is he says, what's the difference between me and God, right? God is just made greater than me, right? That's it. The thunder has made God more powerful. So he also says that hell is a state of mind, right? Even if he was still to be in heaven, right, he would be doubting. He would be envious, right? He These are just the traits that he has, right? So even if he was in the physical space that is heaven, he would still be in hell. So it's up for your interpretation as to whether or not you think that he is sympathetic in this regard. Right? He's definitely good at rallying his troops, right? They're all sort of languishing in the lake of fire. So he is good at least at rallying his troops. So the Romantic poets of the 18th century, they're the ones responsible for giving this sort of sympathetic view of Satan in Paradise Lost. They viewed him as this hero who fought against a power greater than him. It's the same kind of reading some of you guys gave about Hector in the Iliad. Regarding Hector, a lot of you guys said that he is heroic because he stands up to Achilles, who's a god. Well, Satan kind of does the same thing in Paradise Lost. And it's a little bit different. This subject is a little much different because Christianity is still such an important part of our everyday lives, whether you're practicing or not. So to call the devil the hero of the story is a radical idea, right? But it's an idea nonetheless that's entertaining at least to think about. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about Satan and whether, especially in Book 1, you find yourself sympathizing with him. There's some other things to talk about in Book 1 as well, just to go through this. Around line 370 or so, he talks about how all the different Greek gods were actually demons. Right? All the Greek gods were actually demons meant to get us off of, to get us away from the one true God. So Milton kind of does a nice job of spinning all of Greek and Roman mythology and other mythologies as well into the Christian narrative. Another thing that he does here in Book 1 is he describes Satan in this sort of epic way. So around line 590 it says, "In shape and gesture proudly eminent, stood like a tower. His form had yet not lost all her original brightness, nor appeared less than archangel ruined. And the excess of glory obscured, as when the sun new risen looks through the horizontal misty air shorn of his beams, or from behind the moon in dim eclipse disastrous twilight sheds on half the nations, and with fear of change perplexes monarchs. Darkened so, yet shone above them all the archangel, but his face deep scars of thunder had entrenched, and care sat on his faded cheek. But under brows of dauntless courage and considerate pride waiting revenge, cruel his eye, but cast signs of remorse and passion to behold the fellows of his crime, the followers rather." So in Book 1, notice that Satan is still described as this mighty, powerful archangel, right? He's a heavenly being, right? His light, the idea of Lucifer comes from light, right? He's the bright light, but his light is dimming the further he sort of enshrouds himself within hate and envy. So as we keep going through the poem, that's something to consider. The descriptions of Satan will keep getting more and more obscure, right? He will start to become more and more pathetic the further we go through the narrative. He starts out as this great archangel, and of course you guys know the Eden story. He eventually has to possess a serpent, to get Eve to be tempted. So quite a low downgrade to say the least. You know, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance era had this idea called the Great Chain of Being. The Great Chain of Being suggested that there's a sort of hierarchy in the universe. So we start out with God. When you go down to angels, and there's classes of angels that are better than others. So the archangels like Satan and Michael, right, are greater angels than something like a cherub, right? Then we go down to humans. The king is the king of the nation is the top of the pecking chain, followed by aristocrats, followed by the poor people. Then, like on the bottom of the poor people list, there's certain people with disabilities, right, or maybe certain professions, like a court jester. Right? They were seen as lesser beings than most people. Then you get the animals. There's some animals that are ranked in the hierarchy above others. Right? The snake and serpent's probably one of the lowest ones. And then you just keep moving on down. So it's significant then that throughout the poem, it's something to consider. Satan just keeps downgrading himself in the grand hierarchy of things. Becomes more and more pathetic the further we go. So just something to look out for. Book 2 of Paradise Lost takes place as the fallen angels are trying to think about what are we going to do now, right? We're all in hell. We know we can't beat God. We know that God is all powerful. So what are we going to do? How are we going to get past this? So they had this sort of council of angels, fallen angels, who all debate this issue. 3430. So as far as the council of demons go, one is Moloch. Suggests that the fallen angels wage an all-out war against God. He suggests that, what's the worst that can happen? They're already in hell, so, what else could happen? It's almost, he suggests that they make God even madder, so that perhaps God, in all of his fury, will just wipe their souls from existence. They will no longer even exist. It's almost, Moloch's plan's almost this suicidal plan, in a way. You have Belial. Belial is kind of the voice of reason here. He suggests that, the angels should not tick God off more. They should just accept their fate, hang out in hell, make the best of hell. They do build a city in hell, right? So just make the best of it, because God can make things a whole lot worse than they already are. Think about hell and how awful it is. Well, Belial argues hell can be made even worse. Beelzebub. Beelzebub's kind of Satan's right-hand man here. He kind of espouses the plan that Satan wants. And that plan is, let's wage guerrilla warfare against God. We know we can't win. Right? We know we can't wage an all-out war. So let's just skirmish against God. Let's just try to tick God off in little bits and pieces. Let's try to ruin things. There's rumors that there's this new creation of God created in his own image, which is man. So let's do our best to corrupt God's new creation just to really make God mad. So you get the three conflicting views as far as how to approach this. Of course, they take up that proposal, And then Satan flies out of hell, to into chaos to try to go to the Garden of Eden to find this new creature, man. But before he does that, we have the characters of sin and death in the story. Come to find out that sin is Satan's child, right? His child sprang out of his brain, and created sin the moment that he decided he was going to rebel against God. Well, Satan has a child with his own daughter, Sin, and that child is death, right? And death and Satan kind of have this standoff close to the end of book 2, right? But Sin agrees to open the gate from hell into chaos, so that Satan can go on with his purpose. So these characters are allegorical characters. They're not meant to be. They're meant to be taken quite literally as an embodiment of these ideas of sin and death. Right? And as we will find out later, these characters come back after Satan has achieved his purpose. This sin and death then build a bridge from hell to earth. So interesting stuff there. That the idea of sin coming out of Satan's head, it's the same idea from Greek mythology where Athena sprang out of Zeus's head. So interesting tidbit for you there. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of context on Paradise Lost. Like I said, I'll be interested to see if you guys are sympathetic to Satan or not. If you find his ideas about liberty and freedom of the will, not being subservient to a higher power, being your own person, right? Do you fall victim to that rhetoric? Or is this rhetoric a trap? So that's the question that you can answer for yourself. So until next time, I'm going to record another video for book 3 and 4. So until next time, guys, take care. Hope this was helpful. See you then.